The vigilante known as Daredevil no longer operates as a visible symbol on the rooftops of Hell's Kitchen. He is now a suppressed, subterranean operative whose primary perception struggles to propagate through his environment. A newly formed, state-sanctioned apparatus has monopolized authority in New York, outlawing all vigilante activity. Mayor Wilson Fisk serves as the architect of this corporate and political suppression, deploying an anti-vigilante task force to hunt down unauthorized actors. To survive this environment, the protagonist is forced into a rigid architecture of adaptation. His sensory processing, the macrochronology of his operations, and the psychovisual cinematography of his world have all been altered. The previous approach of wearing a bright red suit and operating openly is mathematically non-viable when an entire municipal police force is actively searching for you. Remaining alive in this new ecosystem requires a complete cognitive and tactical recalibration, forcing a recalculation of both the hero and the state-backed antagonists hunting him. Matt Murdock's radar sense functions as a computationally heavy cognitive filtering process. In atmospheric air, this relies on a synthesis of pressure gradients, echolocation, and olfactory inputs. Submersion in an aquatic environment acts as a severe disruptor. The dense fluid immediately distorts wave propagation and neutralizes secondary olfactory inputs. Fluid dynamics alter the speed and travel of sound waves, which scrambles the brain's ability to compile these overlapping inputs into a coherent spatial map. The directors utilize specific cinematographic choices to represent this extreme cognitive load and sensory degradation. By actively altering aspect ratios on screen, the camera physically narrows the viewer's perspective, mirroring the protagonist's restricted field of perception. Blurred visual field edges are layered over complex sound design, illustrating the difficult neurological process of filtering chaotic noise into actionable data. These techniques culminate in a display of intense focus, where Murdock manages to isolate a single crucial acoustic signature, the ticking of a clock hidden inside a submerged shipping container. This severe sensory limitation directly dictates his physical combat adaptations. Rather than relying on prolonged brawls, he shifts to non-lethal, high-trauma kinetic strikes, specifically targeting and dislocating joints to neutralize threats instantly. This brutal combat methodology is a calculated requirement. When operating virtually blind against heavily armed task forces, prolonged engagement is fatal. Aquatic environments externalize the systemic vulnerability he faces in the city above, forcing every tactical action to be a highly calculated risk in a degraded state. This localized suppression is bound by a strict macro-level timeline that dictates the geopolitical reality of the entire city. This chronological chart maps the timeline of events from the late 2025 period to late 2029, explicitly isolating the current operational window in late 2027. This late 2027 window aligns precisely with the Thunderbolts narrative, occurring just prior to its 14-month time jump. The architectural evidence is the new Avengers Tower, remaining visibly devoid of corporate branding. Within this specific era, CIA Director Valentina Allegra de Fontaine is actively pursuing macro-political corporatization goals. Her strategy relies on acquiring maritime infrastructure, specifically the strategic geographical footprint of the Red Hook port. To secure this real estate deal, Valentina incentivizes Wilson Fisk to aggressively eliminate all vigilante interference in the area. Against this geopolitical backdrop, the protagonist's decision to paint his red suit black becomes an operational necessity. The black stealth suit is a utilitarian biological countermeasure. It allows him to evade state-sanctioned task forces in the dark while operating without the visual input required to see his own reflection. Fisk's logistical dominance faces a severe physical catalyst, the partially sunken vessel known as the Northern Star, stranded in the sprawling New York waterways. Submerged within the cargo hold of this vessel is an extensive cache of illicit weapons tied directly to Fisk's operations. If the surviving crew members of the Northern Star testify about the cargo, they represent a severe legal vulnerability, capable of dismantling Fisk's entire criminal enterprise. This newly compromised shipment forces Fisk's task force into a hyper-aggressive posture, desperately scrambling to cover their tracks. The strict late 2027 chronological alignment engineers the exact conditions for both the protagonist's mandatory suppression and the mayor's extreme structural vulnerability. The visual representation of these opposing forces begins with the bureaucratic environment of the Anti-Vigilante Task Force. The cinematography relies heavily on homages to the Time Variance Authority, or TVA, seen in the Loki series, utilizing the exact same directorial team. Wide zoom-out monitor shots, practical lighting choices, and rigid bench aesthetics establishes a suffocating atmosphere of control. This rigid external control contrasts sharply with the psychological framing of the state's agents, particularly Heather. Severe psychotic hallucinations serve as the primary externalization of Heather's post-traumatic stress. The camera cues the audience to her manipulated reality through precise mechanical shifts. Incrementally tilted frames and isolated background paintings establish a diegetic link to the future antagonist, Muse, framing her psychological decay as an origin point. The state's control is further fractured by the tactical threat of Benjamin Poindexter's return. His targeted strikes are highly calculated. He scratches a warning onto the handle of a thrown knife rather than writing it with a marker, actively mocking the protagonist's blindness. His actions are driven by obsessive transference, a psychological phenomenon where a person redirects feelings and desires from one object to another. He has designated the protagonist as his new psychological anchor, shifting the title North Star from his previous fixation on a woman named Julie directly to his ultimate target. The episode's camera logic maps the rigid bureaucratic control of the state while simultaneously externalizing the severe cognitive fractures destroying its key players from the inside. Absolute suppression forces a complete architectural adaptation. The visual, tactical, and acoustic shifts observed are deeply interconnected survival responses to a hostile, corporatized reality. The physical suppression of the protagonist's senses in deep water parallels his broader political suppression by Fisk's regime. Both environments distort reality and punish visibility. Historical precedent exists for this reinvention. In April 1965, the character first adapted his operational identity and suit to better navigate the specific threats of his era. This establishes the central narrative tension for the remainder of the season. Brute force is a mathematically failing strategy against a state-sanctioned threat matrix with infinite resources. The ultimate battle will win by whoever can most effectively navigate this multi-layered ecosystem of compromised sensory mechanics, temporal corporate politics, and profound psychological decay.